Hello everybody. We all know who the Nazis were and what they did. They're famous for the numbers of crimes they committed, from illegal wars and occupation all the way to the literal holocaust. Naturally, these crimes which killed millions of people are the first thing we think about when we hear Nazi. But before all that, they had already committed crimes to reach their goals. One of these crimes was the suppression of freedom of speech, thought and action. By 1933, the Nazis decided that it's not enough to suppress the opposition, and they would have to eradicate it. So they started burning. They burned everything they disliked. 25,000 books were destroyed by them all over the country in one night. The Nazi youth would break into museums and schools and universities and even private collections and destroy anything they deemed to be anti-German. What was and was not anti-German was of course very hard to pinpoint. So usually the decision of whether a work would be destroyed was up to the Nazi holding it. Because of this, many books survived the burnings with only a couple of editions left. But there are works which were completely destroyed. For example, you can't find an original German language version of the Communist Manifesto from before 1933. Hurts my heart every day. But we already knew that the Nazis burned opposition works. But what books specifically? For what reason? And what was it about? Well, there are multiple categories of banned works. There's communist literature, there's anti-German stuff, which just means everything. Then there's anti-fascist works, which can't have those, I guess. And then you have the so-called degenerate works, which were also destroyed. If you like that idea, stick around while I plead to my Patreons. For the love of God, please give me money. I'm not smart enough for a real job, so it's been hard that the last 2 months the ad revenue hasn't been normal, so that being said, let's go. Fascism, in the form we saw it in Nazi Germany, is inherently anti-communist and anti-socialist. The leftist explanation is that when capitalism is threatened by workers like the Soviet Union, then industrialists support an anti-socialist party like the NSDAP. Everyone knows that Porsche and VW worked with the Nazi government, and they made sure that their interests were represented. So literally anything any socialist ever wrote was burned in Nazi Germany. For example, everything Karl Marx created was destroyed. From the Communist Manifesto all the way to Das Kapital. There are some numbnuts out there who think that the Nazis were socialists because their party name says so, ignoring the 999 other arguments. Why would the Nazis burn socialist literature if they were socialist? That makes no sense at all, which is of course because it's a myth that the Nazis were socialists. As a matter of fact, many German leftists were imprisoned as part of the Holocaust, and it was so common that they got their own badge. It's this upside down triangle. Of course, the Nazis did not only hate Karl Marx and what he had to say, they also hated anyone who even hinted towards liking the works of Karl Marx. As such, all works by Lenin and Stalin were burned. Yes, even the collection of Joseph Stalin's poetry, for some reason. Now, this section is called Communists, but it wasn't only communists who were interred and had their lives destroyed as part of the Holocaust. Social Democrats and even some honest-to-God liberals received the same treatment. For example, Konrad Adenauer, the first West German Chancellor, along with East German leader Honecker. Both of them were victims of the Nazis. This really goes to show that nobody, not even free speech fans and capitalists, are safe from fascism. If they come back, you and I are dead. I'm dead for making communist videos and being a degenerate, and you're dead for having a communist video from a degenerate in your browser history. But speaking of fascism destroying everything that's entertaining, the new movie All Quiet on the Western Front would also be banned. If you've not heard about it, the book Im Westen nichts Neues is a German book written by a World War I veteran about a decade after the war. Now, the author said that it's not political at all, it just shows you what war is like. The camaraderie, the adventure, and most of all, the death, pain, and human misery. It pretty quickly became an anti-war classic around the world, so much so that they made it into a movie in 1930, and this got it even more popular, so they made new movies in 1979 and 2022. Yes, they made a Netflix movie about the book, and it's a good one. I recommend you watch it. Because of the situation in Ukraine, it might sadly be a bit relevant, you know. Also, minor spoilers. People ask me what I would do to survive a world war if I was conscripted. Well, in the movie there's this scene where the soldiers are sent to charge the machine gun nests, and they're being brutally killed by someone they've never even seen the face of. And then others come and take the uniforms off, wash them, fix the holes, and hand them to the new recruits. I want to be the one to wash the uniforms. I want everyone else to do the hard parts while I'm sitting behind the front lines getting super drunk every single night. You know, my great-grandpa survived the war for 5 years. And you know how? Because he was a cook. He made food and let the others die. Of course, he eventually died when his unit became depleted and everyone had to pick up a gun. Don't be too sad though. He was fighting for the Wehrmacht. Well, I got way off track. My point was the Nazis banned All Quiet on the Western Front. Officially, that was because it was anti-German, which it really isn't, but okay. Thing is, to the Nazis, anti-German and anti-war were the same thing. And the movie is completely anti-war. It displays the soldiers, their superiors, and even the Kaisers in a non-glamorous way. It doesn't really depict them as bad people or anything, but they aren't shown in a good light. Most old copies of the books and the original film were destroyed by the Nazis. Same thing happened to War and Peace, which is a Russian novel and peak achievement by Leo Tolstoy. I've not read this one, so here's the Wikipedia summary. It's a novel about the Napoleonic Wars. Just like All Quiet on the Western Front, it does not glamorize war, and because it shows the grim reality of war, it's often called anti-war as well, which the Nazis hated, so they burnt all copies they got their hands on. Joke's on them, because there were plenty of copies outside of Germany at the time, so this attempt of cultural genocide failed, like everything the Nazis did. And before you say it, no, the Autobahn network at the time was made up of trash tier material and had to be replaced entirely after the war. The Nazis literally did never good for anyone. Naturally, since National Socialism was a form of fascism, they allowed nothing that was anti-fascist. See, when the Nazis were rising to power, there were plenty of movements opposing them and their drive for power. Those were socialists and communists. Matter of fact, the KPD and NSDAP would engage in brutal and deadly turf wars, I guess. Like, they would literally patrol the streets, killing each other. Say what you want about communists, but they actually tried to stop the Holocaust and World War II before they happened. There was other opposition as well. Eventually, the opposition formed the so-called Three Arrows movement. See, one arrow for everyone they opposed. One arrow against monarchy, one arrow against fascism, and one arrow against communism, which has to be the most centrist option out there. They themselves were all manner of ideologies. Some were social democrats, some Keynesians, some, like, really anyone who didn't like liberal democracy being destroyed was part of the Three Arrows movement. Naturally, they were banned and the leaders put in concentration camps, and all writing was destroyed. What was also banned and destroyed was anything advertising a bourgeois lifestyle. Their words, not mine. This mostly meant advertisements for fancy luxury things. You couldn't advertise jewelry, for example. In modern terms, this bans all of the super rich YouTubers who like to flex. Rap is also a lot of bragging about wealth, so that would be banned too. That's of course not the only reason rap would be banned by fascist government, but it's one of them. Arguably, you wouldn't even be able to take a selfie with an expensive car in fascism. And this one is weird for me. Because obviously these are the Nazis and they're bad. But this one thing is something I kind of agree with. Like, I too hate rich people flexing on the poor. I hate it so much I want to expropriate all their stuff and redistribute their businesses to collective ownership. Honestly, before this video I didn't think that the Nazis had an issue with rich people showing off their wealth. Famously, the rich capitalists in Germany usually worked with the Nazi party, or left. So I don't see why they would ban advertisement for the bourgeois lifestyle. Maybe it was to promote unity, like, we are one people, we are strong, and we don't you dare think about why some of us are richer than others. Check this out, it is many picture of Lenin, ever so right? But it's important to keep in mind that while the Nazis burned everything that depicted a life of luxury, the capitalists were not put in concentration camps like the rest of the people on this list. They also banned everything by George Orwell, but he didn't go to a concentration camp either. Let's now come to the next type of work they banned: degeneracy. This means among other things, all porn ever made. You may not think that there was a lot of porn 100 years ago. You would be wrong. They had just as much porn as we have today. And of course, to the Nazis, this was all bad and banned. Magazines were burned, brothels burnt down, and prostitutes put into concentration camps. Sometimes books were burned for having as little as one sex scene in them. Again, the whole thing was enforced very irregularly. But that was not all. They also took every single trans, gay, lesbian, bisexual, intersex, queer person or anyone supporting any of these groups and put them in concentration camps. Many died just for being born the way they are. This makes me glad to live in a liberal democracy. It might be a capitalist hellhole, but at least I can be trans without being gassed for it. Gotta be happy about the little things in life. Interesting fact, when the Allies liberated the concentration camps, they let out these victims. So you'd walk out of the concentration camp, which you were put in for being a gay communist, and then you would live a new life, and you would be like, holy shit, what the fuck? And then suddenly you see a cop and you're like, ist das Obersturmbannführer Wagner? Yes, it is. And do you know why? Because the Allies used former Nazi officials as police to govern their new West German country. And here comes the real kick in the balls. Being queer was still illegal. So congrats, you came out of a concentration camp run by Nazis into a prison run by former Nazis. The Nazis also hated research and knowledge. In Weimar, Germany, there was a research institute called Institut für Sexualwissenschaften. They did research in all manner of fields related to sex and procreation. They were some of the first evolutionary psychologists. They made studies about STDs, about sex workers, about trans people throughout history. And someone there even wrote the book about the third gender in 1902. The Nazis were so successful at destroying any documentation related to old LGBTQ communities that nowadays your garden variety liberals thinks that LGBT people just popped up in the 70s and wanted special rights. Newsflash, trans people existed for centuries. The Nazis just literally attempted to burn all of the research. Also burned were books from Helen Keller. In case you don't know her, she was deaf, blind, and not able to speak at all. In case you're wondering how living like that works, she would listen to someone by putting the hand on the mouth and feeling the vibrations. So she could feel what you're saying. And using her Braille typewriter, she became a disability rights activist. She wrote 7 books. And later, an avid advocate of socialism. Naturally, the Nazis didn't like the disability activism or the socialism, so it was completely banned. But because she lives in America, she was safe from the Holocaust, unlike other disabled people who were in Europe. Now we come to what is basically the rest. They banned War of the Worlds. It's one of the first science fiction books, and it's about an invasion from Mars. The most notable thing about it is that when it was broadcasted, the audio version... The most notable thing about that is that when they broadcasted the audio version on the radio, some people might have thought it's real. I genuinely can't explain why they banned exactly this one work. Maybe they didn't like science fiction? I have no clue. But if we apply that to today, we could say that they probably banned most movies which exist now. And of course, they also burned everything ever written by anyone Jewish. A large part of academia was destroyed by the fascist takeover. Notably, of course, Albert Einstein, father of modern physics, and Sigmund Freud, sex-obsessed maniac and part-time psychologist. Also, pretty much the entirety of the worldwide nuclear physicists left Germany. They, of course, went to the US and invented a bomb to shove up the Nazis' arses, which they didn't need in the end, but I'm pointing it out because they did the correct thing. Someone threatened to kill them, and they fought back. That's what you gotta do. And you should give me a gun. That was the point of this video. You should give me a gun. So, what have we learned today? Not much, honestly. I guess we learned that the Holocaust did not only affect Jewish people, but also LGBT people, political activists, the disabled. So now we know that. Now pay me on Patreon, or I'm gonna open an OnlyFans. This is a threat. Thanks for watching, and special thanks to Jane the Mentalist, Theon Hartley, Alan Vo, Eric Betts, Lily Lawlett, Nane Pema, V, Sander Corbus, Tusne, Carissa, Daniel Hyman, Domenico Zanelli, Emily Margaret Klassen, Kevin Sanders, Blastro, Lazy Panda 234, Liam S, Ramondaville, Red Shot Trooper, Sarah, Stairmaster Chef, This Was Femboy, Sarah and Jillian Jr., Travis and Yamil. Nailed it!